Welcome to AgriFood Economics Explained.
Great to be here.
Today, we're really getting into the foundational economic concepts that, shape agri-food economics.
Mm-hmm.
And this is especially for you listening students in food engineering and biosystems engineering.
Yeah, the idea is to see how these different schools of economic thought aren't just history. They actually give us practical ways to look at agri-food problems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you're bumping into these economic theories in your courses.
Right?
So we want to help connect that theory stuff to the real world of food systems.
Totally. Understanding these different viewpoints, it gives you a much richer sense of why things are the way they are in the agri-food sector and maybe how to tackle future issues.
Okay, so where do we start? Maybe, like way back.
Yeah.
Before formal economics even existed.
Yeah, good place. Early societies, they had to manage resources somehow. Food, especially.
Our sources mention things like reciprocity, like direct exchange in small groups.
Mm-hmm. Trading favors, goods for goods. And then in bigger empires, you saw redistribution, a central authority collecting and handing out resources.
So not markets like we think of them now, but you can see the very beginnings of managing food supplies.
Definitely. These are kind of the ancient roots of the complex systems we have today. Okay, so let's jump forward a bit. Mercantilism, 15th to 18th centuries.
Ah, mercantilism.
Yeah.
All about stacking up gold and silver, right?
Yeah.
Exporting more than you import.
That's the core idea, yeah. National wealth measured in precious metals.
So how did that play out in agriculture, in food?
Well, nations pushed hard for agricultural production, but specifically for export, because exports brought in that gold.
Okay.
And you also saw lots of protectionism, tariffs on imported grain, for example, to protect their own farmers.
Any specific examples?
Oh, absolutely. Think about colonial agriculture. European powers setting up colonies in the Americas
Right.
to produce specific things like sugar, cotton, tobacco, coffee, stuff to be shipped back to Europe to enrich the home country.
So not necessarily about feeding the colonies, but generating wealth for the European power.
Exactly. And those patterns of specialization driven by mercantilist goals, they left a long legacy. It still influences trade today. Something you have to consider when you're designing supply chains.
Interesting how those old policies still echo. Okay, so after mercantilism, who came next? The physiocrats. 18th century France.
Spot on. The physiocrats. They had a really different take, kind of a reaction against mercantilism.
How so?
They argued that real wealth didn't come from trade or gold. It came from the land, from agriculture.
Ah, okay. The productive power of the earth itself.
Precisely.
Uh-huh.
They believed in a natural order to the economy and coined the term laissez-faire. Basically, let things be, minimal government intervention.
So for agri-food, this meant agriculture was seen as, absolutely essential, the bedrock of the economy.
Totally. They saw it as the primary source of economic growth. They even developed this concept called net product.
Net product.
Yeah, the idea of a surplus value generated purely by agriculture. After accounting for costs, it's like the unique wealth created by farming.
Huh. So the idea that farming creates this unique, fundamental value, you can maybe see echoes of that today in discussions about supporting local food
Or subsidies for basic food production in developing countries, perhaps. It highlights that ongoing debate about the primary importance of agriculture.
Right. Okay, moving into the late 18th, 19th centuries, the big names arrive. Classical economics.
Adam Smith, David Ricardo, yeah, this is a major shift.
What were their core ideas? Free markets.
Free markets, definitely. Free trade, specialization, Smith's invisible hand guiding resources efficiently.
And how did that connect to agri-food?
Well, think about international trade and agriculture. Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage is key here.
Right, the idea that countries should specialize in what they produce relatively efficiently and trade for the rest.
Exactly. It provides the economic rationale for why, say, Brazil might specialize in exporting soybeans and beef because its land and climate give it an advantage.
And that explains these huge global agri-food value chains we see now. Why ingredients travel across the world.
It's the economic logic behind it, yes. As engineers, understanding that helps explain why sourcing decisions are made the way they are.
Makes sense. But not everyone agreed with this purely free market view, did they? Marx enters the picture mid-19th century.
Indeed. Karl Marx offered a fundamental critique of capitalism.
Focusing on
the relations of production. Who owns the means of production, like land? He highlighted issues of labor exploitation and the inequalities inherent in the system.
And for agri-food, how does that critique apply?
Well, you can see it in discussions about, say, land concentration,
Yeah.
who controls large tracts of farmland, or inequalities in access to food itself,
Okay.
and also the role and conditions of agricultural workers within these long value chains. Think about movements for agrarian reform or studies looking at labor conditions, even in things like organic food production for big supermarkets.
So those concerns about fairness, worker rights, land distribution, they draw on this critical Marxist perspective.
That's a big part of it, yeah. It raises questions about equity in the food system that are still very relevant. How can you design systems that are not just efficient, but also fair?
Right. Okay, so after the classical and Marxist views, we get the neoclassical shift, late 19th century.
Yeah, another big change in focus. Neoclassical economics zooms in on individual decision-making.
Utility, supply and demand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Marginal utility, the value of one additional unit. And the idea that prices are determined where supply meets demand, reaching market equilibrium.
How did this help understand agri-food markets?
It gave us the tools to model agricultural markets much more precisely. Concepts like price elasticity became central.
Elasticity, like how sensitive demand for a food product is to changes in its price.
Precisely. Or how sensitive supply is. How much more will farmers produce if the price goes up? Analyzing consumer behavior for food products.
So if you're developing a new food product, understanding its likely demand elasticity is crucial for predicting success.
Absolutely. Or forecasting how a drought affecting supply might impact market prices. This is neoclassical analysis directly applied. Calculating the demand elasticity for beef if incomes rise, for example.
Okay, then the 20th century hits. Big economic shocks, like the Great Depression.
Right. And that leads to Keynesianism, John Maynard Keynes.
His idea was government needs to step in sometimes.
Yes. He argued against the neoclassical idea that markets always self-correct quickly. He said governments needed to intervene, especially using fiscal policy, to manage aggregate demand, fight unemployment, and stabilize the economy.
And in the agri-food world, what did that look like?
You saw policies emerge aimed at stabilizing farm incomes and agricultural prices, which are often very volatile.
Like setting price floors or subsidies.
Exactly, or government programs to buy surplus food to create reserves, ensuring food security and supporting producers. Think of the U.S. farm bills.
Or Brazil's food acquisition program, the PAA.
That's another great example. Direct government intervention based on Keynesian ideas about stabilizing key sectors and ensuring social welfare. But it also raises questions about long-term market efficiency, doesn't it?
Sure. Okay, alongside Keynes, another school emerged, institutional economics.
People like Veblen, Commons, later Douglas North.
What was their focus? It sounds different.
It was. They emphasized that economic activity doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's shaped by institutions.
Institutions like laws, organizations.
Yes, but also informal rules, social norms, customs, contracts, the whole framework of rules, formal and informal, that govern how we interact economically. History and social context matter a lot.
How does that apply to agri-food?
Well, think about agricultural contracts. The specific agreements between farmers and large food processing companies. Institutional economics helps us analyze the structure of those contracts, the power dynamics involved.
Okay.
Or think about certifications, organic, fair trade. Those are institutions that shape markets and consumer behavior. Governance of entire agri-food chains is another key area.
So those integration contracts in the poultry sector you mentioned earlier, analyzing them through an institutional lens helps understand how that whole chain works.
Precisely. It looks beyond just price and quantity to the rules and relationships structuring the system.
Got it. Then, also in the 20th century, development economics became prominent.
Yeah, especially after World War II, with decolonization and the focus on global poverty.
What was the main goal there?
Primarily, figuring out how to help developing countries overcome poverty, build their economies, and structure their productive sectors.
And agriculture's role in that?
Huge. A major focus was on agricultural modernization, transforming traditional agriculture into a more productive sector to drive growth.
Like the Green Revolution.
Exactly. High-yield varieties, fertilizers, irrigation, but also policies around access to credit for farmers, building rural roads, power, storage infrastructure.
So programs like rural microcredit or agricultural extension services helping farmers adopt new techniques. That's
Right.
development economics in practice in agri-food.
Yes, trying to boost productivity and integrate farmers into wider markets as part of a broader development strategy.
Makes sense. And then more recently, we've become much more aware of environmental limits.
Absolutely, which led to environmental and ecological economics gaining traction, especially from the late 20th century onwards.
What's the key difference there?
Environmental economics often focuses on how to incorporate environmental damage externalities into standard economic models, finding the right price for pollution, for instance.
Okay.
Ecological economics sometimes takes a more fundamental view, emphasizing that the economy is a subsystem of the larger ecosystem and must respect ecological limits. Scale becomes really important.
So for agri-food, this involves
Analyzing the environmental footprint, water use, greenhouse gas emissions from farming and food processing, biodiversity impacts.
and looking for solutions.
Right. Designing incentives for more sustainable practices.
Yeah.
Like payments for environmental services.
Paying farmers to conserve forests or water sources on their land.
Exactly. Trying to make conservation economically viable. It asks you, as future engineers, how you design systems that produce food while minimizing harm or even enhancing the environment.
A huge challenge.
Okay.
And finally, one of the newer fields, behavioral and experimental economics.
Yeah, this is really interesting. It challenges the standard neoclassical assumption of perfect rationality.
How so?
It draws heavily on psychology and sociology, recognizing that our decisions are often influenced by biases, emotions, social norms, how choices are framed. We're not always calculating machines.
And how does this apply to food and agriculture?
Well, think about consumer choices. Why do people buy certain foods? How effective are nutritional labels? Do origin labels change behavior?
So studying how people actually behave when faced with food choices, not just how theory says they should behave.
Exactly. Using experiments, sometimes in labs, sometimes in real supermarkets, to test how interventions affect choices about healthy or sustainable foods.
Like showing that clearer organic labels actually lead to more people buying organic.
That's a perfect practical example. Understanding the psychology can help design more effective policies or marketing for better food outcomes.
Wow. Okay, so that's quite a journey through economic thought, from reciprocity to behavioral nudges.
It really is. And the key thing is that each of these schools offers a different valuable lens. None has all the answers, but together they give us a much more complete toolkit for analyzing agri-food issues.
So understanding this evolution helps us grasp why current debates happen the way they do. Debates about trade, subsidies, sustainability, fairness.
Precisely. It provides context. And it's crucial if we want to tackle the big challenges ahead: food security, climate change adaptation in agriculture, transforming food systems to be healthier and more sustainable.
So revisiting those fundamental questions about poverty, inequality, development, trade, but now seeing them specifically through these different economic lenses applied to the agri-food sector.
That's the goal.
Okay, so I guess the main takeaway is that agri-food economics isn't static. It's been shaped by all these historical economic ideas, and each one still offers important insights for understanding our food system today.
Absolutely. And for you, going into food engineering or biosystems engineering, keeping these different perspectives in mind can really enrich how you approach problem solving. How do you design systems that are not just technically sound, but also economically viable, environmentally sustainable, and socially equitable? These different economic theories give you frameworks to think about those trade-offs.
Right. Well, that's a lot to chew on, and maybe a final thought for everyone listening.
Go for it.
Considering this whole historical journey of economic ideas we've just discussed, how might the massive emerging challenges, like accelerating climate change or growing resource scarcity, actually force us to fundamentally rethink and reshape our economic understanding of the agri-food system all over again in the coming years?